If you want to fix a leak that's buried, keep on watching. Let's get started. As a homeowner, there always seems to be another project that needs to be fixed around the house no matter how many projects I take on. And this one was an expensive one. Or at least in this case could have been an expensive one because we have an underground water leak between my water meter to the house. And I know that for certain because I turned off the emergency shutoff valve at the house and there was still continuous trickle of water. This is where my main shutoff valve on the water is, as well as where my underground water line is coming from. Most houses in the continental United States will have some form of water meter that's right next to the street, and you can see the dial actually spinning, and that's with the water turned off, so we know for certain there is a water leakage issue within this 30-foot span. My main focus since day one on this channel is to actually help others learn how to build and create, and in this case, this is extremely valuable and important for any homeowner out there because this is not a project that I have ever taken on before, but after getting a bid for $8,000 just to fix this 30-foot span of space that would probably take them a day or two to do, I knew there had to be another way that was cheaper and less expensive for the homeowner. Plus, stay tuned to the end to see the simple little device that I installed that could have detected this leak days if not months beforehand. And I won't sugarcoat it for the audience because this was a long couple of days to take this on, but extremely valuable 2 days because I did save $8,000 doing it, and be rest assured up front that this did solve my leak issue. So let's get started with the trenching. In order to make the shoveling process easier, I went out and picked up this narrow face shovel that is specifically designed for trenching. I've done plenty of trenching in my day, and luckily for me on this project, the soil was actually extremely nice here in the Pacific Northwest, and it was very easy to do. Not always the case because you never know what you're going to find underneath the ground, but in this case, it was quite straightforward. The one thing you do have to account for when the trenching process is taking place is to figure out how deep you actually need it. In this case, we are in the Pacific Northwest, and that means we need to have our pipe at least 24 inches below grade for the frost line. Take a look at what's required in your general area, but if you have to go deeper, make sure you have a helping hand to do so. Ida, can we hold off on putting the dirt in there until we actually get the new water line in? Okay, gotta put the new water line in first. And then we can fill it up, okay? I love you. Good talk, good talk. She is daddy's little girl to the truest extent because no matter what, if dad's working outside, she wants to be working outside with dad as well. And who's gonna say no to that no matter how much dirt she tries to refill into the trench that I just made? At some point during the digging process, we finally found the existing water line that's going directly to the house. I was actually quite surprised that this was a PEX line because the pipe that's coming directly out of the wall in my garage is actually galvanized going to a copper line. That means that most likely there was a leak prior to this actually occurring, and they just patched it somewhere underneath the ground and didn't replace the entire pipe. That's bad practice, and that's exactly why we have another leak. And that also coincides with exactly why we're replacing the entire line on this project. Now, I'm obviously not a licensed plumber, nor is most people that are going to be watching this video, but the amazing thing about construction is that it's always improving and making it more feasible for anyone else to take on these projects, and that's where Uponor comes into play. This is Uponor, and it's a new innovative plumbing system where it actually expands these sleeves. These sleeves go over our PEX piping, and then this actually increases the diameter. Then you fit the fitting in before it cinches down, and within seconds you have a watertight seal. And basically this is one of the best fittings you can possibly have for a PEX plumbing line these days, mainly because this is always trying to compress into what the size originally was, and that means it compresses onto the fitting for 0 leaks, hopefully. So let's get it installed. In order to feed our 3/4 inch PEX pipe through our concrete foundation, I need to pre-drill a hole, and for that, I'm using a hammer drill. This is a tool that you're desperately going to want to use if you have to drill through a concrete substrate like this. In order to make the process a bit more manageable, I'm using a 1/2-inch drill bit first, going through the entire wall that way, and then coming back with a 1-inch diameter bit and drilling the remainder of the hole. This will allow room to feed our entire pipe all the way through so it can fit snugly onto our existing copper piping. Our water is turned off at our meter, which means it's safe to cut into our copper piping. The one thing I would suggest doing before you start cutting into your copper piping is to actually just turn on a couple faucets in the house to alleviate any of the pressure and reduce the amount of water that's going to drain out of this pipe. With this pipe cut, I then bend the remainder back that leads to our galvanized pipe, and that way I can easily cut the remainder off at the wall. It's not the cleanest look or the most professional look possible, but I will be grinding this down smooth eventually. Just know I'm not leaving a big hole here and calling it good. If you're not a big fan of soldering, I do understand, and there are a couple other ways to get around this, but in this circumstance, I'm only doing one soldering joint, which is very doable and straightforward for the most part. I clean the existing joint with some plumber's cloth abrasive grit roll, and then start applying my flux. Once the flux is on, I then slide on my fitting and start applying heat. If you haven't started before, I will make sure to leave a link for a very detail-oriented tutorial on soldering in the description box below. The main item I keep in mind when soldering, which is difficult to see at this angle, is applying heat to one side, and while it's heating up the copper, you're applying solder to the opposite side that you're applying heat to. That will guarantee that you're not heating up just one side, and the entire joint can have a properly sealed solder all the way around. As we wait for that fitting to cool down, I maneuver our PEX pipe into the hole that we already pre-drilled. Just make sure that you're applying a piece of tape to the very end of your pipe in order to guarantee that no rocks or dirt find their way into the pipe as we're pushing it through. After it's pushed through as far as we need it, we can start the process of hooking up our Uponor to our existing copper pipe. But before we do that, we also need to make sure that we install a shutoff valve at this location because we previously removed the existing one. I place the Uponor sleeve around the PEX and then use the Milwaukee Uponor expansion tool to expand that sleeve. I immediately place my fitting into my pipe because it literally takes seconds in order for that pipe to grasp the fitting properly. In order to have an Uponor connection attached to our existing fitting that we just soldered, I applied some paste thread sealant first and then also applied some plumber's tape around that. That just gives me the best of both worlds and hopefully providing me a leak-free fitting the very first time. Once that is accounted for, I then insert our Uponor fitting onto that and tighten it all the way down with some crescent wrenches. Once fully tightened, I then cut a 6-inch piece of PEX and insert 2 Uponor sleeves, one on both sides. Then I expand one side, insert it and position it onto that fitting that we just installed, and then do the same exact thing to the opposite side. Keep in mind that this Uponor tool is an expensive one, it's like $500, but you should be easily able to rent this at your local tool rental shop. As this fitting sets in mere seconds, I can then move on to maneuvering the rest of our PEX line down our trench. I cut off the majority of our PEX excess, and once that's cut, I then place a piece of tape on that end in order to guarantee ourselves that no dirt is going to get into our pipe. One thing we have to account for nowadays that we didn't have to account for in the past is a tracer line. Because this pipe is plastic, it's very hard to detect exactly where it is underground. But in order to make sure that it's easy for anyone to find later down the road, I'm actually applying a copper tracer line around the PEX pipe, and that will guarantee that anyone from your city or from 811 Dig will easily be able to find this line after it's installed and buried. After the tracer line is wrapped from your meter to the house, I then actually insulate the entire pipe with an insulation foam that can be used interiorly or exteriorly. This not only provides added insulation properties, but it also protects our waterline even more thoroughly to avoid any accidental penetrations once the pipe is buried. This foam roll also comes with a double-sided adhesive, which makes sealing up the seam of this foam extremely easy and straightforward. And just like all of my videos, if you're interested in any of the tools or materials seen in this video, I'll make sure and leave a link in the description box below. Now that our installation is accounted for, and before I start filling up this hole, I decided to grab a heavy-duty silicone and fill the exterior and the interior holes in order to avoid any of the dirt or moisture coming back into the house. As you can see here, I did have to drill a secondary hole for that tracer line because I couldn't actually fit that blue line into the hole after I had our PEX through. I can finally now move on to connecting our PEX pipe to our water meter, and for that I need to install a brass water meter coupling kit. Now this specific one I actually got at a specialty plumbing supply store, but there are multiple different variations of this same type of thing, so if yours doesn't look exactly like mine, not to worry because there are multiple variations to choose from. The premise of this one is clear though. Insert our copper line and then use this compression fitting to compress onto the threads of our water meter. This fitting is over 2 feet deep, so it is quite difficult to try and get a wrench down in there, and making sure I have plenty of space to turn it in order to have a perfectly tight and hopefully leak-proof fitting. The one thing I truly wish I thought about that hopefully you guys all think about first is to actually install any of the other fittings needed before you start installing it underneath the ground, because this fitting right here could have easily been installed up above, which would have made life easier versus me trying to install it down 2 feet underground while also trying to make sure that no dirt and debris find its way into our pipe. Once installed, we're now finally ready to connect our PEX to our copper line. I do make sure that I give myself a little bit extra in order to guarantee that our pipe will not be too short, and once I cut it to the proper length, I then place our Uponor fitting right onto our pipe, use the Uponor expansion tool to expand it, and then seal up that connection. And just remember, those fittings seal up in seconds, so just make sure you're very close and ready to sync up that pipe on that fitting. Key note here before you turn on the water is that you want to make sure you wait at least 20 minutes since the last Uponor fitting was placed, and that will guarantee that if those fittings are properly installed, they won't be leaking anytime soon. As I hold the meter and my dad turns on the water, in true honesty, I was absolutely ecstatic for the fact that I didn't see any leaks along the entire span. Before filling in our trench, I did give it 24 hours just to make sure that there weren't any leaks whatsoever. And after 24 hours, it was safe to say that I felt extremely comfortable filling in this trench because I certainly don't want to try and re-dig this trench ever again. Once you pour in a few inches of fill, I do suggest going back through and tamping it down with your feet. You don't want to all of a sudden fill this entire area without tamping down anything because it is 2 feet deep, so do it occasionally every 4 to 6 inches. It was a last second decision of me actually placing some tarps down before I started digging, and I'm so glad I did because it made the cleanup process extremely quick and straightforward, so make sure you do that on your project. But now that we're done, I have to show you how we can actually track our water usage to make sure that any leak is detected days if not months beforehand. This is Flume, and it's a smart home water monitoring system. I found this one on Amazon and it had very high reviews, so I decided to purchase it, especially with the fact that it's connected to the water meter and not just inside your house, because I want to guarantee that no matter where the leak is, whether it's in the house or outside, it is detected one way or the other. The only problem is that I didn't realize that it doesn't work for all meters. It does work with the vast majority out there, but my home and my meter are old and therefore it was not compatible with my system. Luckily for anyone that's thinking about purchasing, you can actually download the app for free ahead of time and take a picture of your meter to determine whether or not it's compatible before you purchase. Luckily for demonstration purposes, my sister lives just blocks away and I hooked it up to her system with ease. One of the devices is plugged into your house and uses your Wi-Fi network, and once that system is set up and connected to the device that's going to be connected to your meter, it will ask you to run a water test to determine and make sure that the system itself is calculating the amount of water that you're using accurately. Once the test is complete, you're good to go and you can start seeing immediately how much water you're using on a hour-to-hour, day-to-day, week-to-week, or month-to-month basis. And hopefully this simple little device will save you hundreds if not thousands in the end. And that's what I call one beautiful, sexy beast. Oh yeah,